You either use the internet for fun or you use the internet to grow. You're here to grow. Welcome to TRS Clips.
Let me give you one more amazing thing.
Sure.
Ranveer. This is now the familiar story we all know, right? Surya. Surya, our stories say, there are Purana stories, Rigvedic stories that talk about this and say that Surya married Sanjana. And they had Yama, Yami, and marital bliss. One fine day, Surya got so brilliant, so bright, Sanjana could not take the heat. So she abandons her husband and she goes off to the cooler region. That's very important, cooler region. And before she leaves a shadow Chaya in her place. One fine day, Surya discovers a deception. Hey, you're not my wife. Where's my wife? And she says she's gone off to the cooler region. So off Surya also goes to the cooler region to search for her. He finds she's taken the form of a mare, a horse, and he too takes the form of a horse. And in that union, the Ashwini Kumaras are born. They're the traditional physicians, healer physicians in India associated with horse and other such things. They're born. So simple enough story over here. And I was like, what on earth? All these kind of, people say it's a ridiculous story and all these kind of things. But for us, there are several things to take away from here. Because there is a passage in Rig Veda that says Ushas. Ushas is the goddess of dawn. Okay? She appears at dawn. Goddess of dawn is Ushas. Ushas awaken the Ashwinis for their share of the Vedic sacrifice. Such a passage is there in the Rig Veda, which you don't awaken a grown-up man. You awaken babies. Right? So, and the point is that at dawn, Ashwinis are appearing over there, which means along with the sun, Ashwins must appear. Additionally, we know because Surya went to the cooler region, it should be winter solstice in the northern hemisphere because it's gone to southernmost point, which means we are looking for a phenomena when Ashwins are appearing at dawn and it is winter solstice. If you crank this back in time, it turns out to be 7,200 BCE. Staggering amount of time, right? That is when you find that Ashwins appear with the sun at winter solstice point and they're rising.
What was Ashwin's astronomy wise?
Astronomy wise, there is a Beta Delphini, that's a Western name. So we can identify the stars. I might be mistaken.
It's two stars basically.
It is two stars, twin
Wow.
stars. And they're tiny stars, not very
Damn.
bright. So,
I don't know why I'm getting goosebumps, but I'm getting goosebumps.
but the punchline is not here. The punchline is not in the antiquity of 7,200 BC. This was identified by, again, Balagangadhar Tilak. He identified it. 100 years ago, he's been talking about it. And Abhyankar also talked about it about 20, 30 years ago. And
Why is no one talking about it in 2023?
I'll tell you, I've been talking about this for the last 10 years or so. In my talks, I've been talking about Ashwin. You'll be shocked, Ranveer. 2 years back, 2 papers came out in the journal called Nature. In science, Nature, right? Two papers came out 2022 or 2021. I think 2022. That blew my mind again. The reason is because I got an independent corroboration of what I'm telling you through scientific papers. These papers, 2 of them, one of them said there was a solar flare that happened about 9,000 years ago, precisely 7176 BCE. I had dated to 7200 BCE. Their date was 7176 BCE. There was a massive solar flare that hit the Earth. And this solar flare was so big that the graphs in the paper showed completely out of whack. Let me give you a backstory over here. Normally, we always, the sun has got 11-year sunspot cycle, right? When sunspots go to a maximum, you find a lot of them. I mean, you can take a telescope with a solar filter and you can see it. Easily you can see it. And I have seen that right now we're going to a maximum again. And 2 years back, almost smooth. You don't see any solar sunspots. Whenever we have sunspots, there's a propensity for the sun to have a coronal mass ejection, CME event. That is when charged particles are thrown out of the sun, right? And if we are unlucky, it comes through towards the earth. Normally, we are okay because we got the magnetic lines of force, and these are all charged particles. So they conducted away to the North Pole, South Pole by our magnetic lines. And typically what happens is they interact in the upper atmosphere and there's all kind of isotopic activity that takes place, radioactivity that takes place
the northern
at the
and-
North Pole and South Pole.
Wow.
That is why we get aurora borealis. All the northern lights, southern lights are because of that activity. And typically those radioactive particles rain down on the Earth in these polar regions, and they're preserved in the ice. They're preserved in the ice. Normally, it is not a point for contention. Typically, satellites are concerned with there'll be damage, radio communication damage, no biggie. The biggest solar flare we have in recorded history goes back approximately, I think, 1856 or so. It's called the Carrington event. If you Google for Carrington event, you'll find that. This was such a big solar flare at that time that Earth was so ionized. Not only in the polar region. Normally you see aurora borealis about a few latitudes to the north from the North Pole. This northern light was seen up to Hawaii, up to China. That's how far these lights had come. It was that powerful a storm.
Damn.
Not only that, there were operators in the United States in Portland, those days telegraph lines, right? Did Morse code. So they were operating the telegraph lines from Portland to Boston without turning on the power. Because the lines had become so ionized, telegraph lines had been so ionized, the current flowing, they're happily doing that Morse code. This happened for 2 days. Over a period of 2 days, the Earth was so ionized. And this is the biggest event we know. And people are saying in Australia, people used to read newspapers at night without lights. That's the amount of light that you had with this event. Now, with this as a backstory, let us go back to this earlier event. Scientists are estimating this 7176 BC to be an order of magnitude bigger than Carrington event, logarithmically 10 times larger. And this they have found by drilling the ice cores in Antarctica, ice cores in Greenland. It's like a time capsule, right? The ice cores. You can take it to the lab, slice it little by little, and you can study the isotopes like beryllium and half-life of these things. From the half-life, you can now estimate how far back in time. These guys have drawn graphs in this Nature paper off the charts. Suddenly, in 7176 BC, all these numbers are off the charts. When I saw that, I said, my God, this is exactly what I've been talking. Indians remember Surya became brilliant for a period of time. Probably the solar proton event was so great that it ionized the Earth so much, anywhere you see, you might have seen brilliance. It's like a haze that you see in places, right? If you can imagine a bright haze, anywhere you look, it might have been like that. Because
the sun was brighter. Basically.
sun was brighter, hotter, and that happened probably for a period of time, maybe a few weeks and at a time.
I got to dial you back to the story. Who was the sun's wife?
Sanjana.
Sanjana. Sanjana was the goddess of, or was it just...
I don't remember if she's a goddess, but the story says that Sanjana was Surya's wife, and because the sun was so brilliant, she leaves him and goes away to the Kolar region, and he follows her over there.
I'm sorry, my curiosity is making me want to Google what Sanjana was the goddess of.
Sanjana's...
Because there's got to be some metaphor in there as well.
Precisely. And Sanjana's father is Vishwakarma.
Goddess of clouds and twilight.
There you go.
So clouds and twilight went away from the sun. The twilight left the sun.
Right. Which means brilliant. All the time brilliant. No protection. No shade. No protection. So
I'll give you another Hinduism angle to this story. You know the chaya she left behind, the shadow she left behind?
Right.
The sun had a baby with that shadow, and that baby is called Shani.
Right. Yes.
Which is Saturn.
Saturn, yes.
Makes me think that what was the shadow then? Or what was that?
Relevance.
What's the relevance of the shadow?
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
But let me finish this episode.
Go on.
So after this, when I saw this, mind-blowing story that is a perfect collaboration. Here, I gave you 7,200 by reading the Astronomy. By looking at the Astronomy, we call the date to be precisely around 7200 BC, plus and minus 80 years, this side and that side. That's when Ashwins are with heliacal rising with the sun at winter solstice. That is what the story has said. That is what the Rig Veda story has said. We've merely followed the formula and we have got this date. And this date has been known to Tilak for 100 years ago. And for the last 10 years, I've been popularizing this in my talks and so on. 2 years ago, this paper comes out. And I say, whoa, this is a complete collaboration of what I've been talking about. And another paper too came out. The second paper said, looking at the tree rings, They're apparently able to get the tree ring records, and they're saying there was a massive proton event exactly in the same time, 7176 BCE. So here you are, 9,000 years ago, whoever was living in India, our ancestors, have gone through a massive proton event and remembered that in a story.
Yeah, okay. I got to pause you a little bit here and give some millennial perspective.
Okay.
Grew up reading a lot of Amar Chitra Katha. And I remember reading about this exact story about Usha and
Sanjana.
all this stuff. I remember it was a family, and even Yamraj is a part of that family.
Yes,
I don't
yes,
know.
Yama Yami are part of the earlier family. Yes.
So yeah, he's got, I think with Sanjana he has kids,
Yes.
and then with the
yes. Yama Yami with Sanjana.
right.
Yes.
Yama is the god of death.
Yes. And the story is amazing for one more reason. Yama limps and Yami shivers. It could be a remembrance that when this radioactivity happened, these are all cancer causing. Beryllium is massively cancer causing. Maybe it impacted the youth. Maybe youth were bedridden and so on. And the story remembers Yama is limping, not able to walk properly. He's a god of death in addition. And Yami is shivering and that kind of a thing. I'm just saying it's possible. It's possible.
Yeah. I'll tell you my perspective. I remember reading that story, being very fascinated by all these Amar Chitra Katha stories. Okay. So I'm separating Mahabharata and Ramayana from this because I, in my heart, believe that those events have also happened. And those are actual human stories.
Right.
Things have happened in our past.
Right.
But when it comes to these stories, where we're talking about the sun being married to the goddess of twilight, this was also written in Amar Chitra Katha.
Right.
And I remember my mum reading out the story to me from the comic book. And then I asked her, are these people, are these aliens? Are these like some other higher beings? And she didn't really have an answer. And I remember my question mark just stopping there. Cut to 2023 and I've got my answer.
Yes.
That these are celestial events.
Yes. Our ancestors
Encapsulated in
remembered.
stories.
Yes.
The stories traveled from 7000 BC.
Yes, 9,000 years to present
2001 when I
Yes.
read that Amar Chitra Katha
Right.
comic book.
Right.
And this is one story.
Right.
How many other stories are relaying how much of our past?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I go around saying all the time, that our stories have got so much metaphoric content. If we have the key to unlock that wisdom, we know what that wisdom is.
How far are we in unlocking these stories, according to you, like in terms of percentage?
Very poor. Because we have a tendency today to have a pedestrian understanding only. We have dismissed this as myth, right? A very negative word, myth, because we fail to see the metaphoric, the philosophical wisdoms in these stories. Our first tendency is to say they are primitive people. We are the most advanced of times, and these are primitive people. They don't realize that 9,000 years ago, their ancestors had the same cranial capacity. Hey, today you use an iPhone, but that is no mark of civilization or progress as such. You're a blind user of an iPhone. You don't know how it works, what's behind it, most people at least. They don't know what is behind it. So how does that make you technologically more advanced than that man over there? He didn't have an iPhone, but he wasn't perfectly in control of his nature and abstract thought and everything else. So we should not attribute an early man as being primitive to a point where he was making stories like this. These stories are woven intentionally. Intentionally, they were done to encode knowledge. If I were to tell you, for example, Ranveer, here's the theorem A, theorem B, learn this theorem, learn that theorem. The minute the class is over, you're going to forget all about it. I mean, so dry and you can't take it. But the minute I have an infotainment over there, I add a bit of entertainment. See, our rishis understood our minds crave for entertainment. Even today, 1 minute you're on Twitter, 1 minute you're on Instagram, 1 minute you're on Facebook, 1 minute you're there. Because you want to be entertained all the time. A shot here, this one there, that one there, and so on. Rishis understood that. And so they put entertainment over here, along with the story metaphor over there. So these stories, like you correctly said, they have passed on to us for 9,000 years and they're still alive and they still speak to us.
All a human needs is food, shelter, clothing, and stories.
And stories, entertainment. You're a happy man if you have that.
Really makes me think about all the other celestial events, events from ancient history, events from prehistory that are actually tailored into Indian culture. And even now, you are right in saying a big section of the Indian population looks down upon this
Right.
in urban India,
Right,
not so much in the interiors of the country.
Pedestrian understanding of these events. So they dismiss it as myth. It's a reflection of their ignorance rather than attempt to creatively, intellectually decode what their ancestors meant.
New clips released at the same time that a podcast releases. This is TRS Clips. Make sure you subscribe.